right? Like I'm actually living in alignment to the, like, I believe we're all here for a reason. Yeah, there's this trippy thing that's happening is we are the universe looking in on itself. Its consciousness is folded in on itself, having this experience of itself. We can't deduce much about that other than the fact that, well, the universe is curious, right? Like, why would it be looking in on itself? It's curious about itself to some degree. So curiosity actually, with that lens, becomes something sacred. Yeah, curiosity, your innate curiosity to you is something sacred. Yeah, so when I help people build out a vision for their life, so the first thing we do is we understand their values. So I call it the ABCs of purpose, right? So the A is about aligning, and within aligning to their purpose, then there's the B and the C, and we'll talk more about that if you need to. But the first pillar is align, right? And so in alignment, the first thing we do is we get clear on your values, because that's who you are, and that's your soul and what it's here to do, and that's the lens of your personality, and like aligning up your personality to your soul is like, okay, if you can understand your values, this is what I was saying before, is that your values are the pillars of the temple that is you, right? And if you can erect those pillars, now this is the temple, and like the force of your soul can actually flow through into your life. The next thing we do is we get super clear on your life story, your biggest challenges, your biggest gifts. Back to what we shared about my story, right? Like I knew that I would be passionate about meditation, mindfulness, self-awareness, and helping people align to their purpose, live their right career, because those are the challenges that I went through.
So welcome everyone. Today I have an interview with Amrit Sandhu from Inspired Evolution podcast. Amrit is a fellow podcast host and fellow life coach. He's also an international speaker, and his podcast Inspired Evolution features some of the greatest minds in the world in personal development and spirituality. He interviews people like Greg Braden, Bruce Lipton, Marisa Peer, Robert Grant, and some other luminaries and famous authors and public speakers, etc. So I suggest to go to his YouTube channel, Amrit Sandhu, and check out Inspired Evolution podcast. And today's show is focusing on how to transform ourselves and change our lives, because most people are deeply unhappy with their lives, living in the matrix, very often hating their jobs, etc. And this is one of the things that Amrit focuses on and specializes in, is to help people to transition into more fulfilling lives, to find more value and passion in their lives. So this is one of the key topics that we covered in this episode of True Theory podcast. So Amrit also talks about his own journey, how his own experiences led him to start doing the work he's doing now. He was actually struggling with depression. He was diagnosed, he was seeking therapy, etc., and found ways to change that and improve that. So if you are someone who is maybe experiencing similar challenges in your life, this might be an interesting episode for you. Amrit does one-to-one coaching, and you can book a free initial consultation with him, which is like an introductory session. And he also has a master class that will help you to find value and purpose. So the links will be in the description if you want to check them out. Check out his YouTube channel as well. Hundreds of amazing interviews and videos with top people in the world. And finally, before we can start, if you're enjoying what I'm doing here and you want to see more content and you want to see more activity on my end, please consider supporting my campaign. It's truetheory.com/support. Because basically through some of the challenges that we've been going through related to heavy censorship, my brand is currently in trouble, and your help is appreciated. I explain everything on truetheory.com/support. So if you're someone who likes this content, please consider at least checking out the page and support it if you can. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, this is Amrit Sandhu. All right, Amrit, how's it going? Greetings from Europe, all the way on the other side of the world. And it's early morning here. What time is it in Australia?
Oh, it's almost dinner time. It's 6:10 here. Thank you so much for having me, Mike. Such a fan of the work that you're doing in the world. And yeah, really humbled to be invited on as a guest. So thank you so much for having me, brother.
No, you're doing an amazing work. You interview a lot of people that I admire myself, and you're doing really well with what you're doing with coaching and podcast.
Thank you.
So, one of the questions that I want to ask you first, this is like my most common question for new guests, is what was your awakening like, quote unquote, If you could summarize your life a little bit into who you were before, you started doing what you're doing now, and what it was like for you.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for starting with such a deep question. So, being podcasters, I think, I'm not sure what it's like for you on your show, but hosting the Inspired Evolution, I almost see people, there's a consistent theme. People ask me, what's the biggest thing that you've learned? And I consistently see that our biggest challenges equal our biggest gifts. I don't know if you can relate to that, Mike, in like people that are, up to something in the world, it's because they usually care enough to have an impact in something that, initially was a bit of a pain point. I don't think there's anything too remarkable about that in some ways, because it is just the hero's journey at the end of the day, right? Not to sort of already preface my response by calling myself a hero. Touch wood. But nonetheless, it's, that archetypical hero's journey of like where we have some real significant challenges, some real, you go in, you face the dragon, and then you slay the dragon, then you come back from having slayed the dragon, and, you come back with, hey, this was the sword that helped me slay the dragon. And much of life is chop wood, carry water, as per usual afterwards. But you've got all the lessons that you learned along the way. So to sort of dive in deeper, the two big dark nights of the soul, touch wood, that I would sort of say is the languaging I would probably use, is the first challenge I had was I struggled with coming around, like out of university around that time. I struggled with 6 years of depression, major depression, diagnosed, touch wood. And depression is one of those things I don't really wish it upon my worst enemies, is one of the things I start, not that I have enemies, but I wouldn't wish it upon, anyone. And so interestingly enough, that sort of gave, like, there was, when I came out of depression, I was, sitting opposite a psychologist. They diagnosed me with major depression, went through this whole journey. They prescribed medications. I took medications. I didn't feel very good about the medications. And ultimately it was mindfulness and breathing that, I say this when I share from stage, I say sort of meditation and mindfulness reconstituted my life from that point in time. And that's kind of what led me to becoming a meditation teacher. So there was this, I was doing all the things that I was doing in life, but also on the side, I became a meditation teacher because it meant so much to me, right? And that's that hero's journey that I was alluding to before.
Was it any specific method, like Vipassana, Transcendental, anything like that?
Yeah, it was mindfulness meditation. So basically what happened was, I'll dive into the weeds with you a little bit. I was rushing through it a little bit because there's also there's another instance that brought me to the work that I'm doing with the Inspired Evolution as well. But I was 24, and at 24, especially for the men tuning in, I think similarly for the women as well, but you're pretty invincible at that age, like you're full of hormones, nothing really is wrong. Like, you're at a very indestructible sort of phase of your life. So I say that because the fact that I ended up sitting opposite a psychologist, or a psychiatrist, was actually pretty harrowing. Like, a lot had to crack and break in my life for me to be landed in that situation where I finally put my hand up and say, hey, I need help. And this was, over a decade ago, 12, 13 years ago now. And so, it was a time where now I think mental health, especially the last 5-6 years, has become more and more commonly talked about in the zeitgeist. But back then it was just sort of coming into like, you saw buses with, the word anxiety on the side of it, or a billboard with the word depression on it. But people didn't talk about it as much as openly in the workplace like they do now. Like mental health now seems to be a very common conversation. But luckily, I'd probably seen a sign or a billboard enough to sort of say, hey, something's up. My whole world had come crashing down. And I had a doctor. In Australia, how it works is you have a doctor, like, you go to the GP and then they refer you to the specialist. And I saw my doctor. She referred me to the specialist. I went and saw the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist, in her wisdom, gave me some exercises, like mental health, CBT, cognitive therapy exercises, which, forms part of my coaching today as well. But nonetheless, she also gave me prescription pills, and, I went and fulfilled the prescription. But when I came out of the doctor's, the specialist office, the GP wanted to check in with me one more time. And she said, hey, I checked in with her. She was this Thai lady from Thailand. And she said, hey, I used to do some mental health work, and did the GP prescribe you medications? And I was like, yeah, she did. She's like, look, here's a breathing exercise. And in my adolescent sort of vigor, touch wood, let's call it that. We could easily call it stupidity. Not that adolescents are stupid, just me at the time. Touch wood, I was like, breathing? Are you serious? Like, what do you mean breathing? Like, I'm here, I'm breathing, like I'm alive, aren't I? Like I breathe every day, every moment of every day. But yeah, at the time she goes, look, this is a breathing exercise. She wrote it down. And she gave it to me on basically a Post-it note. And it was quite straightforward. It was basically counting your breath. So breathing in, 1. Breathing out is 2. Breathing in, 3. Breathing out, 4. Breathing in, 5. Breathing out, 6. Breathing in, 7. Breathing out, 8. Breathing in, 9. Breathing out, 10. And then backwards. Breathing in, 9. And then you follow your way back down.
So
and
this helps. This helps with like just calming down your nervous system and getting your attention to be present, right?
Ultimately, it brings you into the present moment, and your mind usually is the thing that's flicking you out of the present moment. So now what I've learned is, and this is, what we teach, because one of the people I got certified by was Eckhart Tolle. And he talks a lot about the present moment. He wrote The Power of Now. In the present moment is where we're fully resourced. And in the present moment, there's never really a problem, right? Like all your problems exist in the mind, in the past or in the future. And anything in the past is depressing, and anything in the future is anxiety provoking. And this is why they treat both things very similarly, because actually the challenge isn't that, you'd think, the past is a whole different, ball game to focusing on the future. But actually, no, the challenge is that you're not anchored in the present moment, And so I don't want to demonize thinking in the past and thinking in the future. It's how society got to where we are today, right? Like learning from our mistakes is integral for the evolution of the species, and planning for where we're going also integral for the evolution of the species. But it's when we're left to our own vices and we're spending that time spent in the future, and that's our natural default setting, that, like I can even say on your show now, it's like, I wonder what's going to happen tomorrow. I wonder how this is going to turn out. Is such and such going to be there? I wonder if how's this going to, you can already see like the tempo, like the shortness of breath starts kicking in. It's got that anxiety frequency in it. Or if I look back and it's like, I really should have done that. I really shouldn't have said this. Oh, such and such. Oh man, I really wish that didn't happen. Oh man, I wish. You can already tell, like as I'm looking back, the frequency of it's a depressing frequency, right? Touch wood. So learning to be anchored in the present moment is a massive, massive antidote to anxiety and depression. Now, I want to put an asterisk in this conversation. I do think there are some people that need, medications and SSRIs and chemical support. Yeah, like as a coach, obviously I've got to, dot my I's and cross my T's. But the stats are also in. They say by 2025, 1 in 2 people is going to be anxious or depressed. And so I refuse to believe, and this is maybe just my limitations, but I refuse to believe, and my experience also suggests to me differently, that 1 in 2 people need to be on some form of medication. Something's up. Yeah, like you can't tell me that like 50% of the population needs to be medicated to navigate life. Like I find that really difficult to digest as a story. So for me, the challenge is the way society is sort of wired and geared, and we can talk a bit more about that. But ultimately the challenge, there is some people that need medication, but I think it's a bit heavily handed, more overly prescribed than it needs to be. Yeah. And I think if we can learn some of these techniques like mindfulness and meditation, it really helps us and build a much more robust relationship with myself. So that breathing exercise is a mindfulness meditation. I didn't know that. It was a breathing exercise. After I did it a few times and I was in some really intense scenarios and I ended up accidentally using the breathing exercise. As I used it, things started to shift and I was like, oh my God, like the walls were closing in and every breath, the walls started to move out. And I was like, oh goodness, this is working. And so I started to double click on it in my own life and started leaning in on it more and more.
Do you know like how long it took you before it started working for you?
Actually, the first time I started the exercise, it was remarkable. The very first time I did it. Right? Like, because what happened for me was I was in a situation where I was under a lot of pressure and like anxiety, like I was in an anxiety provoking situation. I remember at the time I was in a university corridor cleaning out my locker, taking all my books and everything. And I remember university was this place which caused a lot of anxiety for me back at that time. And I remember like one of the things I used to do, we didn't used to have social media back then, but I used to spend a lot of time like on my phone speaking to my friends just on the phone back when we used to have, the old Nokia 3310s or whatever. And I went to pick up my phone to call somebody just to sort of medicate, because one of my favorite books on depression, I don't know if you've come across it, is Johann Hari's Lost Connections. And he talks about how a lot of depression comes from actually the connection points that we have in relationships around our life, connections with our family. So connection is ultimately what we're seeking. So I would pick up the phone to connect, to sort of manage my way through these moments. But I had a clear case on the back of my phone at the time. And I remember at the back, by some grace of God, I had the Post-it note for the breathing exercise labeled in there. And I was like, oh, I'm going to just quickly try this. And as I tried the breathing exercises, literally the corridors of the university walls like felt like they were closing in. And with every breath, 1, 2, 3, 4. Like I literally felt the walls moving apart and I was like, what is this? So for me, and I want to be careful suggesting that because I'm sure everybody has a different relationship with such tools and techniques. But for me, it was incredible. The first time I did it, I was like, there's something here for me. And so every time I started feeling that frequency of like anxiety or depressing thoughts again, I'd go back to the breathing exercise and I started using it as a really massive crutch. So it started working almost immediately. And I just want to throw in there as well, I did take, my first antidepressant pill and it was amazing. It was really incredible. I remember taking it and I was on a high. Like I was legitimately on a high. I was like, this is fantastic. Like I didn't know I could feel like this. The challenge for me was 4.5 hours later, I crashed. And I didn't really crash low. I just re-baselined to what my normal baseline was. And that made that, like, I think everybody has a different aptitude for certain things. But for me, it was really intimidating because I was like, oh, I don't really want to live life on a roller coaster going up and then back down and then up and then back down. And I can sort of see how like I could become very easily reliant on, the medication to make me feel up. So, and I'm conscious when I say that because not everybody's wired the same way. I know that much, at least from having coached like 360 plus people now one-to-one intimately. So for me, it was like, yeah, like I picked up the box and I threw it in the bin, but I don't advocate that for people, but that was just what was present for me at the time. And that was before I even found the breathing exercise. Luckily, the breathing exercise found me. And then, the journey evolved 6 months into it, I started to really read a lot of books on mindfulness. And then after that, I started to read books on meditation. And then the Power of Now came to me and I got certified as a presence and purpose coach and trainer. And so that was the first big challenge that I went through that brought me to meditation and mindfulness and built that relationship for self-development. Because one of the things the psychologist said for me in that moment was, and this was part of my awakening, was, Touchwood, she said, hey, you're going to be okay in a few months. And I was like, you've just diagnosed me with depression for like 6 years and you reckon I'm going to be okay in a few months. Like, I know that sounds kind of okay to people listening in, but you've got to remember the context that I had previously before mental health was a conversation was like physical ailments, right? So when you break a leg, you break it in like a minute, or like it's an instant thing. And then it's like 2 months of recovery. Yeah. So in my mind, if I'm struggling with depression for 6 years, it was like, oh no, this is going to take 12 years to recover. Yeah. But inversely, she was like, hey, you've been struggling with this for 6 years, but you're going to be okay in about 2 months. I was like, how can you say that? It's almost like you're discounting all the struggle and the pain that I've been going through, touch wood, to some degree. And she said, no, two things. She said, firstly, you know something's wrong. And secondly, you're here and you want to change it. And I didn't realize how important those two ingredients were. I really didn't. At the time, I was just like, oh, those were things she said. Now as a coach, I look back and it's that thing, right? Like you can lead a horse to water, right? Unless you know something's wrong, you're not really going to shift it. And unless you're willing to shift it and there's a desire to shift it, it's not really going to shift. So touch wood, there was some wisdom in there. But yeah, even with all of that, I found my way forward and, meditation, mindfulness started to build out a life, like it reconstituted my life. And then from there, one of the big hallmarks of, what was gave away that I was, struggling with depression, I was always a good Indian boy, I would say, in terms of growing up in a Western culture, academically quite sound, like always, trying to get straight A's, get good results and stuff like that. And, I was asked to leave university. And that was really weird because it was like, I had built a whole identity around being in like someone that's academic and, something must have been wrong if I was, the university was like, hey, you can't continue here anymore with the way your performance is going, touch wood. And so the interesting thing about that was one of the factors. Yeah, absolutely.
Behavior. Oh, great.
No, due to grades, yeah. And that was really interesting. It was like, what? Like something's not working. And so the reason I share that is because so that was one of the key, like there was 4 or 5 areas of my life that crumbled at the same time, and that was one of the key ones. Yeah, my relationship was another one, touch wood. So there was all these areas of my life that broke down at the same time because the mental health caught up with me, right? And then from there, I started to put my life back together once I got the help, the meditation. Changed cities, switched up the environment, started, and I went back to university and I doubled down. And then 2.5 years later, I graduated university. And I didn't just graduate, and this is going to sound egotistical for a sec, but just bear with me just a sec, guys, because I didn't just graduate top of structural engineering, which is what I was studying at the time. I didn't just graduate top of engineering. I graduated top of all students of all degrees in that year for that cohort. It was like it's called the J. N. McNichol Prize. You can look it up, Touchwood online. And, I won that award that year. And the reason I share that with you is because I feel like I've got an obligation to share it. Now, they went through a stringent set of like assessments, and interviews was a big part of the process of when they were handing out this award. And I remember in the last interview, the last question they asked me was a very good question. They said, hey, why should we give this award to you over anybody else? And I remember at that time, it was a question I hadn't prepared for. I was like, actually, that's a very good question. Like, why? I was like, I've been studying very hard, and I've been, obviously I got asked to leave university and, like meditation, mindfulness, reconstitution. And I was like, so I said to them, and this was one of those moments where you're like, Jesus, take the wheel. Like, I don't know what to say. It's just like, Jesus, take the wheel. Let's see what comes out. Touch wood. So in that moment, what came out was to the effect of, it's like, hey guys, look, ultimately there might be other people that are more qualified for this award. For me, it's the story. Like, I was the kid that got asked to leave university 2.5 years ago, diagnosed with major depression. And, through tools like mindfulness and meditation, I'm now in the running to win an award to be elected as the best student academically in the year. That's quite the transformation, touch wood. And it would speak volumes about positive versus negative mental health. And so if you were to award me this award, I would use it to illustrate the point and inspire others to have the conversation around mental health. And so ultimately, now that I got bestowed the award, touch wood, I feel an obligation to the award to sort of share the story. I know it sounds kind of egotistical when I share it, and I try not to lean into that space too much, but I feel an obligation to that, you know. But therein segues this other point, because with that award and stuff like that, I had the pick of the litter of jobs as well. Like, I could have picked any job that I wanted, basically, that a structural engineer could get, because I graduated one of the finest universities here in Australia. You know, I topped it. And so in there, I got into the job, and I spent 7.5 years in a career that, yeah, like now I can put languaging to it, but going in there every single day, it was like, I felt, well, this is your show, so I could probably, you know, take a bit of a liberty because I know your audience. I literally felt like, you know, in the Matrix, yeah, you like there's you go in and there's that moment where Morpheus takes Neo to present day reality. So they're in the simulation, and then Neo takes, like, he loads up a simulation that emulates present day reality. And Morpheus takes Neo there, and he looks up at the sky, and the sky has been scorched. And I think it's the year 3000 or 5,000 or something. I got to go back and get the reference. But they're in present day reality. The idea being that everybody's plugged into the Matrix and they're being played the past, which is what we perceive as present day reality, but we're actually in the future now. And the sky's been scorched, and Morpheus turns to Neo and goes, "Hey, Neo, actually it was humans that scorched the sky." Because human beings believed in their infinite wisdom, touchwood, that if there was no longer access to solar power, the machines wouldn't have any energy to run. And so human beings would therefore triumph. And the machines in their infinite wisdom realized that human beings were a great source of energy. And so now human beings aren't birthed, they're grown and harvested. And you look to the left, and the camera pans left, and you see these red pods and fields of human beings growing in pods. Yeah, and they're plugged into the Matrix thinking that they're living a life, yeah, but they're actually just being harvested for their energy, right? Touchwood. And that's that moment in the Matrix. And so that harvesting of the energy, like I joke a little bit when I share this from stage, like I just say that I had my midlife crisis. I'm not that much more special than anybody else. I just had my like midlife crisis, you know, in my 30s as opposed to my 40s, because I was working in an industry which worked 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. 6 days of the week, and then you were still doing overtime on top of that, right? So some nights I'd be coming home at 10 o'clock and then be back on site at 6 a.m. So it was very tiring, very exhausting, you know? And so I just put all those hours that you're meant to put into before you reach your midlife crisis up front. And so that to sort of say 7 years of feeling, you know, like career misaligned. And that's a big part of the Inspired Evolution, right? It's like living in alignment to your purpose, to your values. You know, it's critical to really know your values so that you're living in alignment to your values. So your values living into your purpose, and we can talk more about that. But that was the second big challenge of my soul, which was career misalignment. And that was the birthplace of the Inspired Evolution as you see it today. And it was interesting because the first Dark Night of the Soul gave me this real realization that, yeah, you know, like self-awareness is key, and that, you know, we can transform and grow. Yeah, but then also the second Dark Night, I was like, yeah, self-awareness is good, but you've actually got to live in alignment to the things that you become aware of, like honor your true self, right? Touchwood, ultimately, honor your truth. Yeah, I guess I got to say that. I'm on the truth theory, so you got to honor your truth, ultimately in there. And that was the big shift that came, and that was the birthplace of the podcast. You know, something had to shift. I saw people such as yourself doing incredible work, you know, running podcasts, blogs, having conversations around the world, having an impact. I was inspired by these people. I was ready to evolve, and that was the birthplace of the Inspired Evolution. And that was 8 years ago that the Inspired Evolution was born, touchwood. And that's been the journey of me becoming the podcaster and the coach that you see today.
Yeah, no, you talked about quite a lot of interesting things here. So, for example, my brother, he had a lot of issues with depression, and he had very serious drug problem. He was addicted to drugs for like over a decade, and alcohol, and did like a 1 year rehab finally, and get out of it. But he still is on antidepressants for whatever, like 2 years now or more. And I've been trying to explain him some of these things. You talked about to try meditation, breath work. You know, he tried a little bit of breath work, but he is so programmed by the medical system and big pharma, and obviously, like, I cannot convince anyone to anything, but like, to me, the way I see it is often like these pills can help you when you are in like really dark place to kind of get you the boost. But I believe that very often the business model is to keep you on them as long as possible, because that generates money and things like that. So, I feel like practices like you described could help many people to switch or transition from taking antidepressants, for example. But first is information, right? Someone like him, he's very skeptical to anything to do with spirituality, meditation, kind of, second thing, these things are not so easy to learn sometimes. Like, I've tried to teach some friends meditation who need it, I feel like, and they're going to try one time out. This doesn't work, you got to give it a couple of weeks to start feeling comfortable and things like that. And then there is this issue of how the system programs these people to think that this is, scientific, the best solution possible. What do you think?
What comes to mind immediately is I've got a client right now, beautiful brother, and he's going through some challenges, and he's working through he's got coaching, but he's also got a psychiatrist as well. And he's working through his needed support, and he's gone and sought out medication. And it's interesting because this is a new thing for him. And interestingly, he got prescribed one medication. Didn't really work for him after a couple of weeks. And so he went back and said, hey, this isn't really working. You said, check back in 2 weeks. And, the doctor easily could have said, hey, let's hold course for another 2 weeks, another 4 weeks, see how it pans out after 4 to 6 weeks. The doctor's first question, touch wood, and this might just be this doctor, right? So I don't want to shame doctors. I think doctors are amazing and do incredible work around the world, especially frontline medicine. Like, there's some really incredible stuff that, is done. But this particular doctor's question of my client was, do you have insurance? And my client's response was yes. And so he said, oh, sure, let's just try this other pill as well. And the client's like, oh, so I'll come off this pill and try this new pill. And he's like, no, just take both. I was like, okay. 4 weeks later, similar story. Now that he knows he's on insurance, this guy, like, fast forward, now he's on 4 pills. Yeah. And I'm like, how do you, if one does take hold and starts working, how do you know which one? It's very easy for someone to prescribe the pill stack. And, I'm saying this from a place of having researched the pills like quite extensively with my client as well. We go into the nitty gritty of, understanding the contraindications between each pill's medication, what's actually happening for him, what's helping with what's not helping, what he's comfortable with, what he's not comfortable with. Because ultimately what you're alluding to is like, you do have to kind of take your health into your own hands in some ways, right? It's very easy. Like, this person can easily prescribe you 4 pills to take for the next 5 years. They don't have to live your reality. Once you come off the pills for the next 5 years as well, they don't have to live the withdrawals. They don't have to live that reality. It's your reality that you have to live that, right? So, you've got to be mindful in your approach to things. Now, back to what I said before, do I think some people need support with SSRIs? Some people have ADHD and they're working through depression and anxiety, but actually they've got ADHD. So mental health is quite a nuanced subject, which is why specialists in this field is very important to consult. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I do think medications is a bit of a slippery slope. And, you use the word spiritual before. For me, it's, like I said earlier, I just find it hard to believe that 50% of the population needs to, either something's largely wrong with society, that 50% of people need to be like medicated to navigate society at large. But for me, what I've come to understand based on my own journey and experience is like, the career misalignment thing, having known depression, I was back into like a very similar frequency when I was career misaligned. Yeah, it was like, I hate using the word soul sucking because it paints a very vivid picture, but it was really like traumatizing. every day to spend 8 hours, 10 hours doing something you completely aren't aligned to. Yeah. So today I can sit here and tell you, like, touch wood, I've built a life around my highest values. Like, my values are connection, contribution, and celebration, right? These are my 3 core values. I get to connect, contribute, and celebrate. Now, I live everything to the best of my ability in alignment to these values. So when you're like, hey, you're a podcaster, do I get to connect to people? Touch wood, absolutely. All over the world, amazing conversations, individuals such as yourself, right? Do I get to contribute? Hopefully there's a positive impact on people's life. It's the kind of contribution I want to have, at least. Let's just say that. And is there celebration? Hopefully everybody leaves life a little bit richer, fuller for having tuned into the podcast. You can see with coaching, right? Do I get to connect? Yes, deeply intimate, one-to-one with people. Contribution, I'm contributing to their lives. Celebration, we live life richer for it. So now again, touch wood, I'm living into my values. Public speaking, the same thing. Lots of connection, lots of contribution, lots of celebration. So now I'm living in alignment to my values. My mental health strategy is my job. Right? Like, I'm actually living in alignment to I believe we're all here for a reason. Yeah. There's this trippy thing that's happening is we are the universe looking in on itself. Its consciousness is folded in on itself, having this experience of itself. We can't deduce much about that other than the fact that, well, the universe is curious, right? Like, why would it be looking in on itself? It's curious about itself to some degree. So curiosity actually, with that lens, becomes something sacred. Yeah, curiosity, your innate curiosity to you is something sacred. Yeah. So in that point, what are you innately curious about? Now, the interesting thing that happens, I know this is truth theory, so let's go there, right? So the interesting thing that happens is we get educated along the way as we go off of our sacred curiosity. It's like, now you're curious about this, and now be curious about that. Be curious about that car. Be curious about that house. Yeah, be curious about this. Be curious about that. Like, the reason I ended up career misaligned is because I bought into the story. I bought into the story, which is what I call white picket fence lane. Yeah, white picket fence lane looks like this. Get really good grades in primary school, get really good grades in high school, go to university, get a really good job, marry someone, have kids, work really hard, and then finally retire. And now that you're 65 and retired, now you have permission to go bungee jumping. And it's like, bro, my back's not good. I don't know, like I'm hoping I'm like Mike Tyson in the fight, 58, still swinging punches. but I don't know, that guy's got a whole conditioning team and arsenal behind him, yeah? So this whole idea that you've got to live your life, like you can finally live your life at 65, and like in the meantime, like that really just did not resonate. Yeah, really didn't resonate. And I think we're all being prescribed, this is what you need to be curious about. This is what you should be, and I think it's, where you look at a capitalistic society at large, touch wood, consumerism is the mechanism that drives the capitalistic machine. Yeah, so we're encouraged to consume. Now, if you're curious about certain things that you don't innately care about, yeah, then obviously you're going to buy those things. So when you're off your center, as I like to call it, how do you find your center? Your center is your values, right? But if you're off your center, you're going to consume the things to fill the void that was put there in the first place by the machine, by marketing. Like you walk down a main street here in Australia. I'm sure it's the same in Europe. I'm sure it's similar I've been there, similar in the US. There's like billboards of airbrushed people like in their underwear, selling underwear advertisements for Calvin Klein. And I'm like, no one in 1,000 in 1,000 meters from this billboard, maybe there's like 3 people that look like this. But there's like thousands of people that walk past here every day that don't look like this. But this is what's being projected to us, is that we're not enough. We need to look like that. Yeah. And if we don't look like that, at least buy the underwear to look somewhat like that. And it's like, come on, bro. Like, I'm fine. Why are you projecting that not enoughness into me, right? So again, we're getting hijacked, as I like to call it, off our sacred curiosity into, hey, can we hijack your curiosity? Because you're innately curious about something. The universe put you here. It's looking in on itself for a particular reason. But for a variety of reasons, we get conditioned and programmed to want other things that aren't native to our soul. Now, this is, you've done enough podcasts on this, and I'd love to get your take on it, but everybody after a while that's a spiritual teacher ends up, for me, saying similar things. Some call it your higher self, your lower self. Some call it your spirit and your ego. I like to, I've been following Gary Zukav's work for now. It's like soul and personality, I think are pretty clear sort of examples. It's like you've got your soul and you've got your personality. So your soul's here for a particular reason, right? All the spiritual masters say you come knowing what the lessons you want to learn, touch wood. So your soul's here for a reason. It knows what it wants to experience. And yet our personality is hijacked by the system, right? To sort of want to look in and learn a bunch of lessons that don't really, we're educated into a particular format that's not really native to our soul. So the trick is to come back and bring your soul and your personality back into alignment. Yeah. So that you're living in alignment to your spiritual values. Yeah. Now that therein lies a place where positive mental health, my experience exists really richly. Because the reason you were put here, you're not disenfranchised from yourself. You're doing the things you were put here to do, right? And that's where you feel a lot of flow in life, and that's the name of the book I'm writing. It's called Meta Flow. It's like metaphysical flow in your life when you're in alignment. That's the flow you experience. And we all know these flow states, right? So that is like the ode to positive mental health. So in there, how do you understand? So the point about curiosity, I keep talking about values and curiosity. What's the importance there is because how do you know if something is your sacred curiosity or if it's hijacked curiosity? Well, in order to understand that, you need to understand your values. That's the test. So now when something hits me is like, does this opportunity that hits me, does it promote connection? Does it promote contribution? Does it promote celebration? Let's look back at my previous career, right? Building high-rise towers here in Melbourne City. Was there a lot of connection? No. Was there contribution? Somewhat. Like I'm from an immigrant family and we were helping people like immigrant people, like, affordable housing in apartments, like 40-story towers, 50-story towers. Sure. There's some sort of contribution. Is it the kind of contribution I want to have? No, I'd much rather be doing this, but there is some contribution. So half a value is being met. Is there any celebration? No. So out of my top 3 values, I was meeting half a value. Now that also goes to say, this is not a bad job. It's an amazing job. For someone that has the values that line up to that job, it's an incredible job. Yeah. But for me, it wasn't in alignment to my values. So for me, it was the existential cat was being rubbed the wrong way. My native curiosity, my sacred curiosity wasn't curious about this. There's only so much of it, touch wood, we could tolerate. Yeah. So it felt off. So then, crafting a life around podcasting, coaching, public speaking, touch wood became, the antidote to all the mental health challenges that lied living out of alignment to my values into that white picket fence lane, which was hijacked curiosity. So therein lies the importance of discovering your values. And for those people that want to discover their values, 20-minute masterclass, it's completely free, amrit.coach/values or inspiredevolution.com/values. Either the podcast website or my coaching website will take you there. It's 20 minutes. You'll know your values as clearly as I know mine. And you'll be able to tell, this thing that's coming up for me is like sacred to me, touch wood. That's what I really care about. It's really important to know your values so you really know who you are.
Yeah, no. One of the big things I feel like our careers are so important because obviously we spend most of our lives around work or working like you did. First, you had to go through all the training and university to get to the job which you thought is going to be your dream job, but turned out to be your burden. And, this is really like the way we define ourselves is based around what we do for a living. This is like, you introduce yourself to someone and they always ask you, so what do you do? It's like
it's the very next thing. What's your name? What do you do?
Or like, on your Instagram or your dating profile, this is one of the top things. So this is like such a important aspect of life in society, like, our occupation. And most people are very unhappy with what they do. Like, this because you're doing coaching. I do coaching as well. So this is one of the very common things. But changing your career, like around the values, like you described, is also not something very easy to do because, sometimes the transition might take many years. Even for me, I was actually working as a bartender. I went to university. I didn't like what I was studying. I was studying business management and then philosophy. And I was working as a bartender part-time, like saving money to living on a low budget for a couple of years before I started making enough to from my website to kind of like live still very, very modest life. And it took many years of ups and downs before it started getting better and things like that. So a lot of people don't have patience, and maybe they have families already built up and mortgages and all these things. So what would you say to those people who are deep stuck in their dead-end jobs and are unhappy, but they feel like they want to do something else, but it's not so simple for them to transition?
It's a great question. So the key thing in there is it's a case-by-case basis, because like you alluded to, every single person is in a different situation, right? So the person that, is without kids and without a relationship, it's easier to shift and transition. For someone that's got kids and a mortgage, it's a very different story once again altogether. The key thing in there, it starts with awareness of finding out what your values are, right? So once you know what your values are, it's having a look at, okay, this is my current role, my current job. Is there something that's nearby in the wheelhouse that I could, maybe shift across to and say, hey, I could move into this space and this could be more in alignment with my values. Sometimes it doesn't have to be like I've got to uproot my entire career. It's, sometimes it's taking a sideways step. I've got people that have worked in organizations as project managers and now they're like HR managers, because they're people oriented, but they've been focused on tasks for the longest time, but they didn't really care for tasks. They cared more about people. And they're very happy with the role that they've got. Yeah. For other people, it's, this is pretty interesting how this case study works out, is like they've got the mortgage and the kids and everything, and they're still doing the job, but they build like a little side hustle, or they do like a little hobby on the side. And there's so much value that they get out of the values, like what they're doing on the side, because they're living into their values, that in fact, even their job, like let's say they're running a charity or something and they run money through the job into the charity to some degree, that it means that much to them that it's like, oh, like I'm sending backpacks full of pencils to kids in Cambodia, that it's like, oh, this job's fine now. I can actually totally tolerate this job, even though it doesn't really, because I've got this awesome thing on the side. And as that thing starts to grow, they do what we call monkey roping, right? So lots of people think you just have to make a cold shift, like cold turkey, quit your job, go to the next thing. But actually a really strategic way to do it, and we coach people through this, is monkey roping. So a monkey's kind of holding onto one vine, which is your current career. And then the other vine, which is swinging, is potentially a hobby that you start. And then you grab hold of both for a certain period of time. And then you have a look at the business end of the metrics and kind of go, I can see that this has a trajectory now that I can exit this. Business gives you all the analytics that you need. And boom, you can start to swing into the next direction. And like you said, it takes time. Yeah. But I'd actually challenge that to some degree, because it doesn't take as much time as we think it does to some degree as well. Because, I look back at how long it took me to become an engineer. Yeah. And you could argue that all my preschool, my main school education, like even if we just looked at university and all the time I spent there getting educated and how long it took me to become a podcaster and a coach, I spent way more time studying to become an engineer. And in fact, becoming a podcaster and a coach took less time overall, touch wood. Now, does it happen fast enough? No, somehow we have this expectation. It's like, oh, now I'm living in alignment to my dreams. My dreams should have manifested yesterday. And it's like, no, take a beat. Yeah, it still takes work. It still takes you to show up behind your vision and your dreams and your values, right? But it doesn't take as long as you'd think. And the interesting thing, and people innately know this is part of everybody's awareness. When you show up for something that you value and the world will value you, again, the word values is dope like that. The key thing in there is you're going to show up super passionate, and you're going to show up like, I rock up to podcasts. Like you said this at the beginning of the podcast. It's like, bro, it's a Sunday. It's the end of your day. Like what you doing on a podcast? And it's like, man, this is fun for me. I like connection, tick, contribution, tick, celebration. It's like, I couldn't actually picture anywhere better to be right now. Maybe with my own kids, like hanging around, doing some stuff, touch wood. But yeah, like I'm here now, hanging out, and I'm connecting, contributing, celebrating. It's an easy yes. Yeah, because these are my values. I would show up for this again and again. So there's a certain way that you show up when you're living in alignment to your passions that isn't a drudgery. You don't show up begrudging. that actually things accelerate and happen rather fast. Like Truth Theory, the website, when you set it up, like that's a total labor of love. So many people have thought about an idea like that, but because it's not in alignment to their values, they don't do it. And it requires a certain like showing up again and again, again and again, again and again. But because it's in alignment to your values, you did it, right? And it's amounted to what you've done today. So I do think it does take time, to your point, but I don't think it takes as long as people think in many ways. And that's where coaching and guidance can be really helpful. Getting a coach such as yourself, getting a coach such as myself. I know that sounds like a bit of a shameless plug, but people that have never like traversed the territory have built a bit of a map. So the next time someone has to go through the territory again, they know which turns to sort of go down, right? So even for you guys tuning in, like I didn't know anything about values. I was just having existential crisis after existential crisis after existential crisis until I understood my values. And then like 5 years in, I was like, oh, that's why all those things felt so bad, because I wasn't living in alignment to my values. Now that I understand my values, I know potentially what I could go get after. Yeah. And so I've just saved you 5 years in a 20-minute masterclass. Yeah. If you guys want to go check out the masterclass, boom. Yeah. That's 5 years of my life battling around in the dark. Yeah. Distilled into a 20-minute masterclass. Discover your values. Now you know what your values are. They're not going to be connection, contribution, celebration. They might be, but they're going to be like adventure, family. They could be whatever. Yours are unique to you. It's like a thumbprint. Everybody's values are different. Yeah. So, yeah. Does that answer your question, Mike?
Yeah. No. I mean, yes. I wanted to ask you another thing about it that is related, I think.
Please.
Balance. What do you think about that? Because let me give you an example. So I have a friend who is a really nice guy, and he's a very hard worker. But he got married, has a child, and at some point, the honeymoon period kind of wears off, and they are back into like the matrix, paying bills, working hard. And he got caught up into career and workaholism, and was like doing degree and on top of that and things like that. So he started being less and less present around the family. And it kind of, his wife shifted into a different spectrum when he was not present. So she started like partying and having fun, because staying with colleagues at work after work and things like that. And, things went into this direction that she started cheating on him, and the whole thing fell apart, right? So what I think happened here, like, I like to talk about how we have these different areas in life where if you are out of balance, let's say with, we could say health, work, career, family relationships, hobbies, things like that, a couple of these main areas. If you're way too far in one area, like career is one of these things that a lot of people put a lot of effort into their work, and then, health falls apart, or relationships, like in my friend's case. What do you think about the importance of balance in some of these most important areas?
Yeah. So when I help people build out a vision for their life, so the first thing we do is we understand their values. So I call it the ABCs of purpose, right? So the A is about aligning. And within aligning to their purpose, then there's, the B and the C, and we'll talk more about that if you need to. But the first pillar is align, right? And so in alignment, the first thing we do is we get clear on your values, because that's who you are, and that's your soul and what it's here to do. And that's the lens of, your personality, and like aligning up your personality to your soul is like, okay, if you can understand your values, this is what I was saying before, is like your values are the pillars of the temple that is you. Right. And if you can erect those pillars, now this is the temple, and like the force of your soul can actually flow through into your life. The next thing we do is we get super clear on your life story, your biggest challenges, your biggest gifts. Back to what we shared about my story, right? Like I knew that I would be passionate about meditation, mindfulness, self-awareness, and helping people align to their purpose, live their right career, because those are the challenges that I went through, right? So that's that, again, hero's journey. So we uncover that work. The next thing we go through is we build out a vision. The reason we do it in this order is once you know your values, if you build out a vision that isn't stacked up on top of your values, you're building out someone else's vision, yeah? If you're building out things in your life that aren't based on your own journey and the things that are most passionate and important to you, if you can't draw a story as to why you really care, like you don't have a deep-seated why, building a vision out in that space is just, you mean you can do it and you can go out and get after it, but it's not going to be meaningful to you. You'll have success, absolutely, but you won't have meaning, yeah? So the path is about meaning and fulfillment, right? Your soul's journey here. So when we talk about the word balance here, now when I do vision work, one of the things I got certified by is Life Book, yeah? And we build out your life in 12 different dimensions. Yeah, so we look at your relationships, we look at your parenting, we look at your emotional self, we look at your intellectual self, we look at your physical health, we look at your social dynamics, we look at your intimate dynamics, we look at the environment you want to spend time with, we look at your career, we look at your finances, we look at your quality of life. So we look at 12 different dimensions of your life, right? We run it through a process. And if people want to go through that process, that's also free. inspiredevolution.com/vision. or amrit.coach/vision. Yeah, both places will take you to the same place. That's to build out a 12-dimensional vision for your life, completely free, yeah, for you guys to download. So again, another masterclass, right, on how to access that. So the key thing in there is once you start to build out a 12-dimensional vision of your life, I remember when I did this for myself the first time, my life was like in each quadrant was about 3, 4, 3, 4, 3, 4, and you know, the big thing was career was also like a 2, but finances was like a 9. Yeah, because I was getting a handsome salary building high-rise towers here in Melbourne City. Yeah. And then quality of life and everything. So I could see that actually, once I looked at all 12 categories, I was giving so much prevalence, to your point, to finances that everything else was kind of, but I looked at like the 12 dimension and was like, if I just gave up on finances for a hot minute, my emotional self would be better, my health would be better, my relationships would improve, and like maybe not everything else would become an 8, but at least it'd be a 6.5, 7. Some things would get to an 8. And this is to your point, you know, of balance. It was like maybe finances is only 1/12 of the pie. Yeah. Now it's a pretty important part of the pie because it actually does enable health. Like, you know, you can go get fitness and, you know, trainers and, you know, eat good food and stuff like that. So finances definitely helps. But I do think, to your point, that we place a lot of emphasis on it. I do think it deserves a healthy amount of respect, but it's also not the be all and end all, right? Like health, they say, is the crown that the healthy man wears that only the poor man sees, right? Because when you're sick, you realize that it's actually all you need is health, touch wood, right? It's all we have. But yeah, so that's the balance piece, right? So taking the time to build out a vision across all dimensions can be really helpful. Yeah. And that gives you permission to sort of go, because I remember that's what was happened for me. Yeah. I ran it the first time and I saw this and I was actually doing the exercise. I was in Costa Rica at the time. I went away, took myself on a solo retreat just to give you guys an insight on the kind of strange sort of individual that I am. It's like, okay, I'm going away with a handpan and a surfboard for 2 weeks. I've got 12 categories in my life. I'm going to work through one each day, surf, make some music, hang out in Costa Rica, drink, you know, coconuts and, you know, just hang out and just, you know, eat acai bowls and stuff like that. And when I finally worked out, like I got to the 10th category is finance, I walked out of my, like, cause I was living in a hotel, in a surf hotel. I walked out, moved in, like sat in the common area, and this guy sat opposite me at the time and he goes, "Are you okay? Bro, you look like you've seen a ghost." And I remember sitting opposite him and I was like, "Not really. I think I'm about to quit my job." And this guy goes, "Oh, that's great news." And I was like, "What do you mean?" I'm having like a borderline existential crisis here. And he goes, "I just quit my job." And I was like, what? Like, I'm still like anchoring this in that this is possible. And here's someone that's actually like, you know, and I was like, "Tell me more." And he goes, "I'm an engineer from the States and I'm traveling to China to teach English." And I was like, I'm an engineer. And he's like, what sort? And I was like, structural. He's like, I'm a structural engineer. And I was like, what is going on? Shut up. And I'm like, why are you on your way to China to teach English? And he goes, I just saw an email and I was sitting at my desk and I was like, there's got to be more to life than this. And I saw the email and I was like, how trippy would it be if I just followed through? And I was one of those guys. And so I just clicked the email and said applied, and they said, yeah, come to China, teach English for 6 months, and I'm going to go see what's up. And I, had enough of an awareness around synchronicities at that point where I was just like, bro, I don't know, maybe this is the nail in the coffin to some degree. It's like, I should be listening to the signs. If I needed a sign, this is a bit of a sign. Touch wood. So, and I think we all have those signs. Right, it's just a matter of tuning in, like, to the subtle awareness of where they present. Touch wood. But yeah, so that was. I think that paints the point. Like, if you've got a vision across your life, like your mate, taking the time to build out a bit of a vision. It takes time. Like, took me. I took it slow. I did an area of my life a day. It takes you about an hour to do an area of your life, so it's really just 12 hours worth of work. You could probably smash it out in 2 to 3 days if you do it at a retreat. But I took it easy. I did an hour a day. And then, by the time I got clear on it, it was like, oh, I value all this other stuff. Yeah. And this, but, can I see more? Can my life be richer across all the dimensions rather than just sacrificing for one dimension? Touch wood. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. You actually, to me, this is a perfect example of synchronicity where you are attracting your mirror in a way, kind of to show, yeah, he can do it, you can do it as well. And what do you think about synchronicities? Because this is a very interesting area for me. I feel like there are ways to improve synchronicities, to have more of them. My perspective is that we kind of, like, the more you are in the flow, the more you are tuning into, like, your authentic self, the more you open synchronicities in your life, the flow of synchronicities. Do you think, what's your take on that? Do you think we can improve the flow of synchronicities, and what's your view about it?
Yeah, I totally, similar to you, look at it as the universe talking to me. Yeah, so when I see synchronicities pop up, it's like, oh, I'm on the right path. Like, Alice in Wonderland down the rabbit hole. It's like, oh, that's, it's like I'm on the right path. I saw that synchronicity, or that clicked in, or that popped in. So absolutely, I see them as affirming points. The universe doesn't, for some people it does speak to them via words. They channel, they connect. For me, it's these signs, that actually you're on the right path. My trippy dippy awareness, which I don't know if is right or wrong, but one of the things I like to contemplate is in the quantum, right? They say it's all one big eternal now. So quantum computing is working with time as a variable, right? And so in there, it's like we're learning to, I don't want to say transcend time, but work with time. And so when they do quantum healing, most of it is like regression, they regress back to certain parts of your life and they go in and they heal it. And you meet yourself in that moment in time and you do all the healing that you need to do and you come back into your present body. It's like, how do you do that? And it's like, well, actually that version of you and this version of you and the future version of you actually all exist on the quantum timeline because it is all now. Yeah. Which becomes pretty trippy because then it's like, is it all destined? And when you speak to people that are in quantum, it's like, well, it's not really destined. It's just a field of probabilities. And which probability timeline do we step out on? Which becomes, whoa, really interesting, right? But the key thing I bring that up is I wonder if right now I was to pray for guidance, and this is why I think conscious people see more synchronicities because they're more likely to pray, have these sort of dialogues. Hey, I'd love some guidance, or I'd love to get some clarity. In my meditation, I was wondering about, can I get some insight on this, or can I get some clarity on that? Sure. Now, what happens is I might be praying for guidance now, and then that prayer in the quantum field, touchwood, gets picked up, and 2 weeks later, I see a sign or synchronicity. I was looking for clarity, and something shows up that gives me clarity. Or in the past, some part of me sees a point that leads to a sign, which was part of the prayer, touch wood, that got put in at this point. So I like to sort of ruminate on that sort of stuff. Is that really what signs and synchronicities are? Could be. It's your own prayers trying to guide yourself. It's your own intentions trying to guide yourself, right, on the path that is most aligned to you.
Do you have like some formula? How do you pray? Or is it just your intent, like, I would like to get more clarity on this or something like that? Or is it directed somehow?
Yeah, so for me, one of the best books I ever read was The Science of Mind by Ernest Holmes. One of the big parts of the book is he talks about prayer, and it's just a dialogue. It's just a conversation. There's nothing fancy to answer your question. There's nothing fancy in there. But one of the things he says, which he's really astute, he's like, you never pick up a prayer and you're like, oh, hey, God, today for breakfast I had about 4 eggs and some bread with butter. It was really yummy. I really like that breakfast. I'd love, a few more breakfasts like that if you don't mind, And then you just don't talk, like your mind just doesn't do that when it goes to pray. Your prayers are always like, dear God, thank you for your abundance. Really appreciate, the food on my table for myself, my family. Like the way you communicate your prayers, touch wood, it's really interesting. Like, and Ernest Holmes goes as far as saying, you naturally fall into like a deep layer of clarity when you're like putting out your prayer. And that is the clearest your mind ever is what he says. Because he goes, even when you're meditating, like you've got all these thoughts sort of bumping around, yeah? But when you're praying, it's like this is my prayer. So whether you like it or not, when you're under the conditions of I'm going to pray, you're generally having a conversation with the universe to some degree, or God, or whatever it is that you're praying to take your pick. But you're generally quite clear in your prayer. And that's pretty interesting from Ernest Holmes' work, The Science of Mind. And so, yeah, I don't think you can really do it wrong. It's your own connection relationship. One of the things I will say is I would invite every person to build their own relationship with prayer, because it's like faith, right? You've got to have your own relationship with faith. It's unique to you. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like we gotta watch out to not pray to some kind of demons or negative beings. That's kind of my take. I feel like more like to the source or higher self, my higher self. Like this is how I direct my kind of prayers, is my higher self. Please guide me and protect me, or something like that. So it's kind of, the free will aspect works here, where it should work with me, my higher self, nothing else. So that's kind of why I was asking if there is any direction or like naming or anything like that. But the intention itself, I think this is already activating. If you are starting to like, I want to know something about if this is a good idea or bad idea, sometimes these synchronicities appear. And this, I think it's enough for many people. If you have like, you want to understand if this is a right thing or not, I think the universe is kind of will show you what's important, or the higher self, right?
Yeah, I think you can trust your signs and synchronicities when they arrive.
Yeah. Also wanted to ask you, like, you interviewed a lot of really interesting people, like Bruce Lipton, some of the biggest names in the world. Is there, or maybe from the books you have read, is there something that really impacted you a lot, like maybe some idea, teaching, something that you could recommend to others, or maybe it's one of your episodes, one of the guests you had, like something that really struck you, like, wow, I didn't know that, or like that defined how you started thinking afterwards for a while, something?
Yeah, there's this is a tough question to answer.
I mean, you don't have to
Yeah.
pick the
Yeah.
very best, but maybe something that
yeah.
comes to your mind.
There is a particular instance that comes to mind. There's a few at the oh no, there's tons. The more my brain starts to reach, the more it starts to flood in. The one I will share is we had Marianne Williamson on the podcast. For those that know, she wrote a few books breaking down the Course on Miracles. Really, really awesome books. And she's got that famous quote that our greatest fear is not our darkness, but our light. We're afraid of who we really are. But when we give ourselves permission to shine, we unconsciously give others the same permission to do the same. And, therefore it's like it's a very beautiful, beautiful, beautiful prayer she puts out in the world. When she came on the podcast, she was running for president for the United States. It was really cool to watch a female spiritual teacher running for president of the United States. I was just more than G'd up. I was just like, bro. For me, that was just, the context was super cool. One of the things she said in that episode, I think she was quoting, it was either Nelson Mandela or Martin Luther King. So pardon me, I'm losing the context on that, but I know what she said. She said that this teacher said that power without love, is corrupt. Yeah, we see that everywhere. It's like there's this power, but there's not love in it, and it's quite corrupted. But then she went on to say, love without power is anemic. And I thought that was quite profound, because up until that point, championing love was, it was an easy thing to do, like spirituality, oneness, love, unity, right? These were all interchangeable words. But it was almost like she was like, yeah, but, you guys can talk about love all you want, but you've actually got to power your love. Like, you've actually got to be an activist to some degree. Like, you've actually got to do something you love. You've got to do something about what you love. Like, otherwise there's plenty of power floating around and it's corrupt. So you've kind of got to show up behind your love with power. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's like a balance between point to balance that you were saying before. And that was a real call to arms. She also in that same episode talked about waging peace. She's like, we wage war, but we don't use the word wage peace. But peace, if it's going to be successful, needs to be waged. Yeah. It's like an active doing. Like, you've got to do peace. Yeah, like you've got to do your meditation. Like, you got to sit there and go into your meditation, but you've got to do it. Like, it's something you need to do, right? So waging peace. So that contemplation on power and love and power was quite a profound piece for myself. There's quite a few. There's quite a few that pop to mind. Especially so many interesting pieces around just the resurgence of like ancient wisdom, modern science, and how they're coming together to test and say similar things about the nature of our reality now. Some of the quantum science findings are really interesting as well, how they're sort of affirming, more of this less matter, more energy. It's a field, the awareness, consciousness, the observer effect, like all this sort of stuff is really, really, really interesting. So I could talk forever on this.
This is a really interesting topic to me. Mixture, like how science and spirituality, let's say, are two sides of the same coin, because this is how I see it. Because, modern science looks at religious ideas or spiritual concepts or metaphysical, esoteric, mystical philosophy as mumbo jumbo, some kind of beliefs. Like Richard Dawkins is this kind of guy. He dismisses all these ideas. And the way I see it, for example, I think they are extension of themselves, like science and spirituality. But because, scientific rigor, they are not really ever spending time to properly investigate these fields. These fields very often require a lot of self-work, like and not necessarily something that you can prove experimentally easily, but more through your own experiences. For example, like how you're gonna measure synchronicities. Like synchronicities work differently for everyone else. They're individual to and unique to everyone, right? But this is something that I'm really passionate about. Like, for example, let's say the law of attraction. I have a friend who is hardcore science guy. He runs one of the biggest scientific publications in the world, and we often get into these debates about science and spirituality, and he's gonna be like, oh, you cannot, let's do a study on like law of attraction, and you're gonna see there's gonna be no indication that this works. And I'm like, yeah, because it works differently for different people. Everyone is different. Like, you cannot have some kind of easy way to measure it using such methodology, right? But and then they don't get answers about what is the nature of consciousness. They still think it's in the brain, maybe. It's like a part of evolution that we became self-aware and things like that. But if you listen to all the ancient teachings, they tell you that, everything is alive, everything is consciousness. So the consciousness would affect everything else because that's the basis. So here you have an explanation of why law of attraction would work, for example, because it's just a part of how the mind works and everything is the mind. So, to me, this whole debate is really interesting. But do you have any, what's your take on that? And do you have any examples of like science versus spirituality, how they're kind of two sides of the same coin, maybe?
I think the truth of it is always quite relative to the individual based on where they are in their life, and also relative to each individual independently. So what do I mean by that? So there was a time in my life, like engineer by qualification, where, hardcore science, and I guess growing up Indian, I've always had a relationship to, spirituality. But yeah, there was times where I was much more science-based. I'm still very curious about science now, but my current awareness, I'll share it with you this way, is that there's a video I invite people to go check out online. And there's a few like this, but it's of the audible spectrum. Yeah, listen to sound frequency. It's just an audio. Just go type in 0 hertz to 20,000, and it'll just play you a video going from Now, the interesting thing is, it only starts kicking in at about 1,000 hertz. And then it taps out for different people at different points. But for some people, it's like 10,000. Some people, it's 11, 12,000. Some people still quite young. They tap out at 16,000 hertz. But it's still playing sound on either side of those spectrums. But we are only having the fidelity to hear within a certain spectrum. So science is a measurable art. And I use the word art consciously. I know that's going to trigger some people, but science is a measurable art. Yeah. So you can repeat the experiment and get the same result, but it's measurable. So the key thing in there, it lives within the measurable spectrum of reality. I can visually see the experiment. I can audibly hear the experiment. I can kinesthetically do the experiment. I can olfactory. I can smell the experiment. Yeah. But again, it's within the spectrum of those senses. Yeah. But when you come to spirituality, it seems like there's way more going on than these senses. Now, can you prove that? Well, therein lies that Einstein quote. It's like either nothing is a miracle and you can't prove that, which is totally fine as a hypothesis, and, or absolutely everything is a miracle. It's very binary in that sense to some degree. right? And so in that space, for me, with my current awareness, I believe that actually all of reality, seen, unseen, all of non-reality, maybe it's a Maya, it's something like so many people have so many conjectures about it, which is what the podcast is dedicated to, exploring all these methods, insights, spiritual paths, so many incredible teachers sharing so many incredible insights from their vantage and their perspective and their points of view and their traditions and their lineages, right? Coming closer and closer to a higher truth. But the interesting thing is, I believe if all that is true, right, then science lives within spirituality. And that's my current awareness, right? Because I believe that all that spirituality is true. Now, one of the key things in there is there's a song that my wife sings, which is actually by a gentleman named Andy. Dang it, I'm skipping on Andy's last name. But the song goes to the degree, he's a friend of ours. And the song goes to the effect of, there's a line in there which says, there are some things you have to see to believe. Science, there are some things you have to see to believe. But there are some things you have to believe in to see.
Mm-hmm.
Spirituality, right? Science, synchronicities, right? The more you believe in your synchronicities, the more they show up. Touch wood, what is going on there?
Yeah.
Right? Sorry, go on.
No, this is, I thought about, like, this is such an important thing that if you're skeptical about subject and you're gonna reaffirm your skepticism, like you start doing some research on the topic and you find things that prove your point because that's how you see things. Like, for example, this friend I was talking about who is runs this big scientific publication. One time I took him to a conference where there was like people like Bruce Lipton and some of these like known spiritual kind of teachers, Greg Braden, etc. And it was like a 3-day event, and he finally ended up going only for 1 hour, and I was there whole weekend because like he was busy, something came up. And when he arrived, there was a talk that looked like complete, like cult mumbo jumbo, something like it was some guy who was doing some prayers on the stage, and it looked like Scientology meetup or something.
It was the one talk he shouldn't have gone to.
Yes, and there were some other guys who if he would see, maybe it would start making sense, but he came there exactly in the wrongest moment possible for someone like him.
Nah, it was a perfect moment. He manifested it.
and then he was like looking at me that I invited him there, and he was like, yeah, enjoy the show or enjoy the rest of it and something, and left, after 1 hour. And I thought this is exactly because like he lives in his bubble and he only wants to see the version of reality that reaffirms like his beliefs. So he manifests this in this way. And another example that I have similar one, like there's a guy, I think you had him also on your show. I had him as well, Daniel Pinchbeck. And he talked about how he was researching crop circles in England. And basically he invited some friends from the US to show them some crop circles. And when he was like inviting skeptical friends, the ones that he would find were looking like fakes. And when he was inviting friends that were open to these things, they were finding some amazing crop circles. So it's almost like, we get what we manifest, living in our own bubbles. And this is a big problem because scientists who are skeptical by their nature, they cannot really get into that deeper truth because they are blocking themselves, right? Would you agree?
I think those are the scientists that get a lot of airplay in the science community. You studied a lot as an engineer, right? Like did PhD thesis, like a lot of, and engineering is just applied science, right? It's science. And studying a whole bunch of science and then bringing that to, like the the world in modern applications. That's what engineering is, touch wood. So, and quite a few of the greatest like lecturers that I came across for me in my time had a deep spiritual knack. And I remember I asked this question like at least to 4 or 5 different lecturers as I was studying. And I asked this exact question of them. I was like, hey, how come some of these deeper engineering thinkers, scientific thinkers, seem to have a bit of a spiritual inclination? And generally the response, I'll paraphrase everybody's response into like a broad brush response. It was like, it kind of gets to the point where you're in science, you're trying to grow your level of understanding. You've kind of got this awareness and you kind of try and grow, and it grows a little bit. And then it grows a little bit more. And then it grows a little bit more. But then as you continue to grow, you start to realize, oh, this is just, I could play this game infinitely and it'll continue to grow. What's it growing into? And so generally, most people that are curious and seeking, because that's what brings them to science. This is back to what we were saying, innately your sacred curiosity. It's a spiritual thing, right? And so they start to tap into it and they start to realize, oh, this is growing. Oh, this is quite mystifying. What is science growing into? Touchwood. So I've actually found a lot more scientists that actually have very deep-seated spiritual beliefs. But I'm conscious that, we reference Richard Dawkins, we reference certain people like this, and they're the ones that the science community, certain sliver of the science community, want to make their proponents for science. They're sort of, and so that's what gets airplay. And we've got to be careful in terms of what gets airplay, because at the moment where we're currently at, polarization seems to be really coming to a head in society at large. So, having that sort of science or spirituality is like, and it's like, actually, it's a pretty dope time to be alive. Like, everything is spiritual if you want to believe it that way, right? But then science is now being applied to verify some things like, whoa, like it's actually... it's like, oh, and like we thought it was all matter, it was all dense, it was all solid, and it's actually all energy and it's all vibration. And it's like, whoa, this is all, what is the nature of this? Like, but why can't I put my hand through the microphone, but I know it's mostly air. It's like, forces of repulsion, forces of attraction. What animates the forces? There's forces. What? Whoa, forces. Right. Interesting. So, yeah, there's a lot to be curious about there, but I think the key thing in there is to be mindful of where we're getting our information from to some degree, touchwood, because I do think there are, and I think there's meant to be, right? There's meant to be proponents of science, which are like, there's only science. There's no spirituality. There's no people in that, right? Because again, we're all the universe looking in on itself. No two of us are superfluous to the grand design of it all. The universe is curious about itself, right? So it's meant to look in on itself as Amrit and have a certain, set of values, a certain set of perspectives. And, it's meant to look in on itself as Mike and have a certain set of values and have a certain set of perspectives. It's meant to look in as Richard Dawkins or as a scientist or, whoever, and have a certain set of values and have a certain set of perspectives. They're all valid. That's the hard bit. They're all lowercase t truth for that particular individual. The trippy thing is you need to put together all those truths to get the big capital T truth. And this is why unity is the ultimate big capital T truth in many ways, right? Touchwood.
Yeah, no, you are mentioning some interesting, giving some ideas. I think about like the biggest names in science, like Nikola Tesla, let's say. He's my favorite, kind of...
I'm not surprised to hear you say that. Yeah.
Historical figure. And he had a lot of deep metaphysical beliefs and things like that. Newton also turned out to be an occultist. You know about it, right? They found his notebooks or something where he was studying a lot of
Einstein, Carl Jung, alchemy. Yeah.
Yeah. but then we see people like Dawkins or Neil deGrasse Tyson, who is like such a skeptical scientist, and he gets so much exposure, and it kind of makes me think about like commercialization of science and every other field, because it's like McDonald's. Everyone knows McDonald's, but McDonald's has crappy food, and if you want to have a good burger, you're not going to go to McDonald's, you're going to go to a local family-owned business. So you gotta, or same with commercial music versus underground music, and same with like commercial science, and I don't know.
But this goes back to the point that I was making. Oh, sorry to interrupt you. This goes back to the point I was making before, which was depends on who you are and where you're at, but also which stage of your life you're in. Right, when I gave my response before about spirituality and science, because when you're younger, like I think you believe in matter because it's just it's what you know, right? But then as you start to get older, you touch wood, see people transition, you see certain things happen, you see some things that happen that you can't explain, you see the laws of karma playing out for certain people, you start to question some of these things and the bigger nature of what's at play, and that's why, you start to see people, especially in their 60s, coming to more and more spirituality because they're like, like what's next? Like I'm here. How did I get here? What's next? Whereas when you're 20, it's like, I'm here. Watch out. So it's, it's like what's next is not really a topic of interest at that particular time. For I don't want to say everybody, but like there's some really interesting to it, like people that don't think that aren't interested. But you get my point. It's like there's it's less of a collective interest at that particular point for the majority because of the stage of life that they're in. I look back and I used to listen to quite heavily misogynistic hip hop growing up. And now I look back at it and I'm like, oh man, this is like, it just feels cruder than crude. And I don't want to sound like I've evolved or I'm enlightened. Like I still love great hip hop, but some of it I find really hard to listen to now because I'm just like, I was in a different state and a different awareness. Now, was it bad? It's great music. It helped me channel all my adolescent, fears, rage, energy. It was great, touch wood, for the purpose at that particular point in time. And so, I think people that are of a certain awareness are supporting people of a certain awareness. And I think people of a different awareness are supporting people with a different awareness. And this comes back to I don't believe there's wrong really. It's horses for courses depending on where you're at and what the universe wants to witness and experience, touch wood, through you at that particular moment in time.
Yeah, no, to me, like I'm always a little bit angry that there is all these people who, in my view, promote like they are the big scientists, but they are like attacking spirituality, whatever, as pseudoscience. And I want to see the world where, people know the truth and all these things. So when I observe that only minorities really resonate with what you're saying, what you're talking about, then the majorities are not. I kind of, I don't know, I get a little bit angry about it, but I guess
do you
it's
think
just
more and more people are waking up though, Mike? Like your work has been, when you first started your website and now like watching your work and the traction that it's getting is beyond inspiring. So does it, in your mind, are more and more people are waking up?
That's what I think. We are moving into a more mature society where these ideas going to be becoming more mainstream. I think this is exactly what's going to happen, hopefully, over the next few decades, and this is why we are here as well, to kind of facilitate that. So that's I think it's inspiring to some degree that these ideas slowly start becoming more and more mainstream. Yeah, and you said also interesting thing about like how we are, like you are listening to hip hop, misogynistic hip hop. I used to do the same. I was even hoping I'm gonna become a rap artist when I was 20. And when I look at all these things now, like, I was very heavy into electronic music scene and raves and parties and things like that. And now when I go to something like this, where I see people completely wasted, I feel like it's so unconscious in a way. And at that time, I thought this was just the best thing ever. So it's kind of interesting how, like, once you are immersed into something, like, you see it completely through a different lens than once you step out and your level of awareness raises, and then you see it very differently. This is also really interesting, Yeah.
I think the trap to be mindful in there is, I did a couple of interesting podcasts recently, and the opposite of love is now, in my awareness, it's not actually hate. I think in the collective, we sort of go, the opposite of love is hate. And people have started pointing to some serious spiritual teachers going, the opposite of love is actually judgment. And I think that's really dope, because you can actually, like, I don't really hate a lot. Yeah. So I can't really discern when I'm hating. So it's like, yeah, I'm actually pretty much all love then, because I don't hate love. I don't hate much, but judgment and having that in your awareness is actually, and I'm not saying you're being judgmental, pardon me for that. It probably comes across that, but I just wanted to sort of just share, is actually really helpful, because what happens in there is like, now I can sort of see, like I run the risk of, because I've done that before, where it's like, I'm holier than thou because of said thing, right? And this is where I'm like, that's actually not love. Like, I'm actually discerning between myself and that individual, and I'm sort of, so, and that's kind of why I say, like, everybody is entitled to their own perspective at that point in time. Like, I'm sure somebody back when, I was listening to misogynistic hip hop thought I was a complete idiot, and yeah, one of my favorite personal growth quotes is like, you're on the path of personal growth when you look at yourself from like 10 years ago and you're like, oh my God, I'm not sure I want to be left in a room alone with that guy. It's like, that guy's full on. I'm not sure I want to hang out with that guy. Touch wood. But yeah, back to the point is like, I am of the opinion, this is just a theory in my head, but those of your listeners tuning in, especially the more discerning ones would know the double slit experiment, right? Which is they run the experiment, they'll pass light through, there's double slits, and depending on, the conditions of the experiment, it shows up either as dots and particles or as a wave. So how does light actually behave? Is it particles or is it waves? And we don't know, right? It's the ultimate answer, and it's like it's both, or it's not. Whoa, and it's like it's a really cool conundrum in science, right? But one of the things I would like to sort of offer up is I think it's all waves, right? But when we do things like judgment, we particulate things, right? So we sort of crystallize things. And actually it becomes really important, and I find this in my coaching work a lot, is you're normally moving through a challenge in your life or a gift in your life, something's happening. But if you judge yourself for how you're navigating something, so like, I'll give you an example. It's like, easy example. I want to give up alcohol, right? Someone comes up with this conjecture. I'm going to give up alcohol. Cool. All right. So now you're starting to move through alcohol, and then you slipped up. Now it's like, hey, the conversations there, it's like, hey, everybody slips up when they're trying to do something new. It's totally normal. You've done really well. You haven't drunk for 2 months. Yeah. And this was like a day, but let's just be mindful and we won't do it again, and maybe next time it'll be 3 or 4 months between your next drink, and not everybody has to give up alcohol, by the way. It's not like the worst thing, but just an example that came to mind. Now, some people at 2 months will be like, oh, like you've slipped up again. You like, my God, like now what's going to help this person transform? And we do this to ourselves. A lot of people's negative self-talk is like this. Oh, I'm worthless. I can't commit. I did this again. And they're doing that to themselves. Who's going to transform? The person that you go, hey, everybody slips up. Don't fuck it up again. Yeah. Is that person more likely to evolve or have a drink later down the line? Absolutely, right? Because they weren't judged. They were supported. Yeah. As opposed to the person that was self-berating or someone else was judging them. It's like now the energy sticks. It's more particulate. It's less wave. And now they're more likely to be stuck in the whirlpool of the exact energy that they're trying to eject themselves on through the judgment, through the berating. And so I find, touch with judgment, again, the opposite of love, right? It's like it actually, and it becomes, I like it because it gives us something much more tangible to work with. Yeah, it's like, oh, I can feel when I judge. Like I can feel, and this is not, reflecting on anybody, but this is, I can feel when I judge people, but I can't feel when I hate people because I don't really hate people, but I can feel my judgments. Yeah. And so in that, it becomes like a tool that we can work with. And so therein lies this, and I've just brought it into the conversation because I think for some people listening in, there is an opportunity, when we do judge it, we judge ourselves a lot. God, judge ourselves a lot. And then we also judge others, but actually that's the opposite of love. It's like, hey, we're all here doing a thing. We're here, souls signed up for lessons, learning a bunch of lessons. And those are the lessons you're learning right now. Viva, if I can be of service or support, let me know. Touch wood. I'm on a bit of a spiritual path. Service matters, right? Here to help. Ring the bell. I'll come. Touch wood. But at the same time, like, your path is your path, and good on you, good for it. Learning to love, because that actually supports people through the shifts and the transitions, I believe, to some degree. I'm conscious that's made it sound like you were being judgmental, but you weren't, but I just felt compelled to share that. So pardon me for that bit.
No,
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay. I mean, it's judgmental, whatever. I just feel like, same like, you described, like, we just look at these things differently. Doesn't really matter. How we see our own selves, even ourselves. But like, this is a really good point as well, what you said about like, if someone is trying to overcome addiction, to not be harsh on ourselves, because it's gonna be challenging anyway, so you're gonna slip. Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to mention before we're gonna wrap up? You said you're working on a book, right?
Yeah. Touch wood. It's called Meta Flow, and it starts off with sacred curiosity, like we discussed before. The high level, like, I encourage everybody to get a copy when it comes out in the new year. The high level is, you've got your sacred curiosities, and in fact, and how to check if they're your sacred curiosities. Remember, everybody, go get your values, discover your values, yeah, and then cross-check. Oh yeah, I'm curious about this. Does it stand on the shoulders of my values? Like, I'm curious about conscious conversations. Amrit is, right? So it's like, okay, does that connect? Yeah, connection's in there. Is contribution in there? Oh, maybe conscious conversations can contribute. Is there celebration in there? There is for me. I like those conversations. Okay, cool. I'm curious about this. Spirituality, connection, contribution. Yeah, cool. Quantum science, connection, contribution. Cool. Podcasting, connection. Now you've got a few things that you're curious about. There's a bit of a formula. Again, I'm an engineer by qualification, so there's always formulas, right? If you can draw a ring around, ideally about 5 different curiosity points, minimum 3, but ideally around 5 to 6 different curiosity points, yeah, them bouncing off each other actually is a passion for you. So you just need to take some time to cultivate your curiosities, yeah? And you actually start to cultivate a bit of a passion. And I draw passion as a cup. Yeah, when people say, fill up your cup, we all hear that, fill up your cup. His cup is full, touch wood, of like, and they mean joie de vivre, life, viva, fill up your cup. That cup is a cup of your passions. That's what the chalice is. Call it the Holy Grail, if you will, touch wood, at this particular juncture of the conversation. Right? How do you fill up the cup of your passions? Is to spend time with your sacred curiosities. How do you know if they're your sacred curiosities rather than the conditioned curiosities? Again, your values. So values, curiosities spent time with your curiosities, you'll be filling up your cup of passions, right? Now, this is one of the things that traps people, because the conversation is around purpose. Yeah, how to live your purpose. That's meta flow, right? Like, how do you live life in alignment to your spiritual alignment? Right? Because that's where flow. So Stephen Kotler's work, he talks about flow, right? So flow states is like hacking all the neurotransmitters to live a life, like to live in the moment, to like experience more and more flow in the moment. But if you zoom that out, when you're living in alignment to your values, you're hacking your values, and life shows up. It's like almost like life is a self-correcting mechanism. The stress is in your life. I believe stress is an amazing free life coach in your life. When you're stressed, when I was 7 years career misaligned, it was stress, yeah? So I was super stressed, and that stress was indicating to me that I was out of alignment. I didn't listen. More coffee, more sleepless nights, just pummel it down, keep going, right? But listen to the stress, listen to your life, Yeah, there's a healthy amount of stress, which is like you're going after your dreams. Then there's an unhealthy amount of stress, which is like, whoa. Your nervous system is dysregulated. Please rein it in. Yeah. But that to say, you've got your values, you've got your curiosities. Fill up your cup of passions. Now, one thing that where people get led astray is they will feed into, I'm curious about coffee. And they're like, I'm going to go run a coffee business, or I'm going to become a barista. So you're curious about one point, and you go and try and make that your whole life's offering and purpose. Now, you've bypassed passion. Yeah, you've found something you're curious about, and you're building a whole life around it. Take the time, then you mentioned patience earlier, to play at the intersection of passion. Go to a couple of go to a meetup, go to a few coffee shops, meet a couple of baristas, make friends with a couple of baristas. Do you really go to a couple of roasteries, travel to Colombia, go to some farms? Do you really love coffee enough to make this your life? It's it's not just about the stimulation. It's also about the plant. It's also the soil. It's also the people that are into coffee. Now I've got 4 data points of intersection. I just love spending time here. I'm filling up a passion. And the more you cultivate your passions, that's all you have to do, right, to live your purpose ultimately. Yeah. So cultivate your curiosities, you fill up your cup of passions. Now you're like, yeah, this is passions, but you haven't really described purpose. You've just said that they're the same. They are the same. Your passions are for you. Serving your passions to others is your purpose. Yeah. So ultimately, you've got to take some time to do things for you. Go explore coffee, right? Cultivate the coffee. Yeah. Over time, you're just going to be talking about coffee, speaking about coffee, sharing about coffee, and you'll just be sharing, and your cup will be overflowing, right? So to put it back into an example, I was just doing podcasts. People were tuning into these conversations on the Inspired Evolution, and they will get and a couple of people reached out from the audience and said, will you coach me? And I was like, on what? They're like, just have the conversations that you're having with me. And I was like, there's value in that. And they're like, yeah, I'll pay you. And I was like, nah, man, come on, really? They're like, yeah, legit. And so I was just cultivating the curiosity around the things that I had. I was cultivating the cup of passion, and eventually just was overflowing. People were like, hey, you got a little bit of extra to have a chat with me about it? And I was like, yeah, I can. And it was like, okay, cool. I'll do it for you. And now we're having this chat. I've found a purpose. I'm being reimbursed for it. The world is valuing what I inherently valued in my sacred curiosity. See how value lives on both ends of the spectrum? Now the world is valuing it. Yeah. And so, boom, now you've got a purpose.
I want to add one thing to what you said, because, someone, let's say they know what they desire, they have the purpose, passion, figure out, but some fields or some goals, some areas are extremely challenging, right? And I feel like they're not for everyone. Let's say you want to become an actor. I was actually doing an acting classes for 1 year, doing theater acting. I really enjoyed that and things like that. But I met people there, because to me, it's one of those fields where it's all or nothing. So it's either you become successful and then you get all the perks and everything, or 99.9 they not going to get very far there.
That's a perfect example, yeah? It's a perfect, sorry to cut you off, it's a perfect example. Yeah. Because again, you weren't, I hate to say this, you weren't that passionate.
Yeah.
I would argue waking people up the way that you are through truth theory, the flack that you cop, the things that people say to you online, dealing with people's negative comments, all the things that come your way. There's a lot of love as well, don't get me wrong, touch wood. But the way, that, for some people, that's way harder. But you're passionate about it, so you keep showing up. So you can't fake your passions. I remember when I used to date in high school, I used to try and get the girl to laugh. Yeah, and because you can't fake your laughter, right? It's just one of those things. You either find this funny or you don't. And I remember I'd tried to be funny, not that I was a clown, but I tried to say a couple of things and I was like, oh, she didn't laugh at she didn't thought, oh no, this is not going to work. I thought that was hilarious. She didn't think that was funny at all. And we're not cut out. And it's the same thing. Yeah. So you can't fake your passions. Yeah. So you had a curiosity point around acting. Yeah. And it definitely, like, you had some interest in it.
Wasn't mine. I'm just saying about other people I met.
So right. But they had a curiosity. They had an interest in it. Yeah. Now, was it their sacred interest? Like, what were their values underlying that? Or was society told them it was a really good career because of stars and projection and conditionings? Maybe they had their own value lining up into it. Like, they really loved, story and, and character. Maybe they loved that, lined up in with their values, right? Sure. For some people, it could be just hijacked. Because you think about the number of people that want to be actors. But again, because it's not stacked on their sacred, like their own true value system, they're not going to stand the test when it comes to the marketplace because they're not that deeply passionate about it. Case in point, right? Like, being a podcaster, as you know, is not easy, but you're doing it. Yeah, you're doing an amazing job of it because you're passionate about the content that you're sharing. You're waking people up to certain things. Yeah?
Yeah. No, it's but I'm just feeling like to measure kind of your goals based on like what you're capable of doing, what you're really important, because like, let's say if you're passionate about acting and you are maybe don't have what it takes to become an actor, you can be, I don't know, writing maybe blogs about actors or some kind of journalistic job related to it, critique, or something different, working in theater or something that is more aligned.
And that's what you're doing now. In those curiosities, remember how I said find 5 intersection points? So you've got a passion for writing, you've got a passion for screenplay, you've got a passion for Hollywood. Now you've got 3 or more intersection points. You're naturally going to want to do more of it. You'll start cultivating a passion. Now you've got something. You can fill up your cup with it.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Amrit. Thanks for joining me. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we're gonna finish?
Ultimately it's just I find it, I'm always a bit awestruck by just so many people will listen into a 2-hour podcast. They'll listen all the way through and have an incredible, it means a lot to me that people listen in all the way through to the end like this. I still, touch wood, find it very humbling. And yet there's some part of me that just, this is a little bit of a nudge from me, I guess, is you still won't spend 20 minutes to get clear on your values. After everything we've discussed, like 20 more minutes, you could understand your values. Spend another hour, you can get clear on your vision, right? So inspiredevolution.com/values, inspiredevolution.com/vision. You don't have to battle around in the dark. Like, I wish I knew what my values were sooner, right? It's such a simple masterclass to go through, and you'll literally be just as clear as I am on what your sacred values are for you, touch wood. And, you can go away and do that literally at the drop of, it costs you nothing. It's free. So yeah, and the vision is there as well for you to build out your vision. That one takes admittedly more time, but like you spoke to the importance of balance. When you think about what's the cost of not living in balance, it actually is, totally worth the time you spend in there. So thank you guys so much for listening into the podcast. If I can encourage you to go discover your values, highly recommend, inspiredevolution.com/values, amrit.coach/values.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot for joining me.